consequences of growing the seed in the first place. Localized surgery sometimes introduced incompatibilities with the rest of the psychoblast, while alterations widespread and thorough enough to guarantee success could be self-defeating, effectively obliterating the original psychoblast and replacing it with an assembly of parts cloned from past healthy ones. But there were risks, too, in doing nothing. Once a psychoblast became self-aware, it was granted citizenship, and intervention without consent became impossible. This was not a matter of mere custom or law. The principle was built into the deepest level of the polis. A citizen who spiraled down into insanity could spend terra ta in a state of confusion and pain, with a mind too damaged to authorize help or even to choose extinction. That was the price of autonomy, an inalienable right to madness and suffering, inseparable from the right to solitude and peace. So the citizens of Konishi had programmed the conceptory to err on the side of caution. It continued to observe the orphan closely, ready to terminate psychogenesis at the first sign of dysfunction. Not long after the 5,000th iteration, the orphan's output navigator began to fire, and a tug of war began. The output navigator was wired to seek feedback, to address itself to someone or something that showed a response. But the input navigator had long since grown accustomed to confining itself to the polis library, a habit which had been powerfully rewarded. Both navigators were wired with a drive to bring each other into alignment, to connect to the same address, enabling the citizen to listen and speak in the same place, a useful conversational skill. But it meant that the orphan's chatter of speech and icons flowed straight back to the library, which completely ignored it. Faced with this absolute indifference, the output navigator sent repressor signals into the change discriminator networks, undermining the attraction of the library's mesmerizing show, bullying the input navigator out of its rut. Dancing a weird, chaotic lockstep, the two navigators began hopping from scape to scape, polis to polis, planet to planet, looking for someone to talk to. They caught 1,000 random glimpses of the physical world along the way, a radar image of a dust storm sweeping across the sea of dunes, ringing the North Polar ice cap of Mars, the faint infrared plume of a small comet disintegrating in the atmosphere of Uranus, an event that had taken place decades before but lingered in the satellite's discriminating memory. They even chanced upon a real-time feed from a drone weaving its way across the East African savanna toward a pride of lions. But unlike the library's flowing images, this vision seemed intractably frozen, and after a few taw, they moved on. When the orphan stumbled on the address for a Konishi forum, it saw a square paved with smooth rhombuses of mineral blues and grays, arranged in a pattern dense with elusive regularities, but never quite repeating itself. A fountain sprayed liquid silver toward a cloud-streaked burnt orange sky. As each stream broke apart into mirrored droplets halfway up its arc, the shiny globules deformed into tiny winged piglets, which flew around the fountain, braiding each other's flight paths and grunting cheerfully before diving back into the pool. Stone cloisters ringed the square, the inner side of the walkway a series of broad arches and elaborately decorated colonnades. Some of the arches had been given unusual twists, eschered or climbed, skewed through invisible extra dimensions. The orphan had seen similar structures in the library and knew the linear words for most of them. The scape itself was so unremarkable that the orphan said nothing about it at all. And the orphan had viewed thousands of scenes of moving, talking citizens, but it was acutely aware of a difference here, though it could not yet grasp clearly what it was. The Gestalt images themselves mostly reminded it of icons it had seen before, or the stylized fleshers it had seen in representational art. far more diverse and far more mercurial than real fleshers could ever be. Their form was constrained not by physiology or physics, but only by the conventions of Gestalt, the need to proclaim, beneath all inflections and subtleties, one primary meaning. I am a citizen. The orphan addressed the forum. People. The linear conversations between the citizens were public, but muted, degraded in proportion to distance in the scape, and the orphan heard only an unchanging murmur. It tried again. People! The icon of the nearest citizen, a dazzling multi-hued form like a stained glass statue, about 2 delta high, turned to face the orphan. An innate structure in the input navigator rotated the orphan's angle of view straight toward the icon. The output navigator, driven to follow it, made the orphan's own icon, now a crude, unconscious parody of the citizen's, turn the same way. The citizen glinted blue and gold. This translucent face smiled, and V said, "Hello, orphan." A response, at last. The output navigator's feedback detector shut off its scream of boredom, damping down the restlessness which had powered the search. It flooded the mind with signals to repress any system which might intervene and drag it away from this precious find. The orphan parroted. "Hello, orphan." The citizen smiled again. "Yes, hello." Then turned back to Vis' friends. "People! Hello!" Nothing happened. "Citizens! People!" The group ignored the orphan. The feedback detector backtracked on its satisfaction rating, making the navigators restless again. Not restless enough to abandon the forum, but enough to move within it. The orphan darted from place to place, crying out, "People! Hello!" It moved without momentum or inertia, gravity or friction, merely tweaking the least significant bits of the input navigator's requests for data, which the scape interpreted as the position and angle of the orphan's point of view. The matching bits from the output navigator determined where and how the orphan's speech and icon were merged into the scape. The navigators learned to move close enough to the citizens to be easily heard. Some responded, "Hello, orphan," before turning away. The orphan echoed their icons back at them, simplified or intricate, rococo or Spartan, mock biological, mock artifactual, forms outlined with helices of luminous smoke or filled with vivid hissing serpents, decorated with blazing fractal incrustations, or draped in textureless black, but always the same biped, the same ape shape, as constant beneath the riot of variation as the letter A in 100 Mad Monk's illuminated manuscripts. Gradually, the orphan's input classifying networks began to grasp the difference between the citizens in the forum and all the icons it had seen in the library. As well as the image, each icon here exuded a non-visual Gestalt tag, a quality like a distinctive odor for a flesher, though more localized and much richer in possibilities. The orphan could make no sense of this new form of data, but now its infotrope, a late-developing structure which had grown as a second level over the simpler novelty and pattern detectors, began to respond to the deficit in understanding. It picked up the tenuous hint of irregularity. Every citizen's icon here comes with a unique and unvarying tag, and expressed its dissatisfaction. The orphan hadn't previously bothered echoing the tag, but now, spurred on by the infotrope, it approached a group of 3 citizens and began to mimic one of them, tag and all. The reward was immediate. The citizen exclaimed angrily, "Don't do that, idiot!" "Hello." "No one will believe you if you claim to be me, least of all me. Understand?" Now go away. This citizen had metallic, pewter gray skin. V flashed this tag on and off for emphasis. The orphan did the same. No! The citizen was now sending out a second tag alongside the original. See? I challenge you, and you can't respond. So why bother lying? Hello? Go away! The orphan was riveted. This was the most attention it had ever received. Hello, citizen. The pewter face sagged, almost melting with exaggerated weariness. Don't you know who you are? Don't you know your own signature? Another citizen said calmly, It must be the new orphan, still in the womb. Your newest Copolitan, Inoshiro. You ought to welcome it. This citizen was covered in short golden-brown fur. The orphan said, Lion. It tried mimicking the new citizen, and suddenly all three of them were laughing. The third citizen said, It wants to be you now, Gabriel. The first pewter-skinned citizen said, If it doesn't know its own name, we should call it idiot. Don't be cruel. I could show you memories, little part sibling. The third citizen's icon was a featureless black silhouette. Now it wants to be Blanca. The orphan started mimicking each citizen in turn. The three responded by chanting strange linear sounds which meant nothing. Inoshiro, Gabriel, Blanca. Inoshiro, Gabriel, Blanca. Just as the orphan sent out the Gestalt images and tags. Short-term pattern recognizers seized on the connection, and the orphan joined in the linear chant, and continued it for a while when the others fell silent. But after a few repetitions, the pattern grew stale. The pewter-skinned citizen clasped this hand to this chest and said, I'm Inoshiro. The golden-furred citizen clasped this hand to this chest and said, I'm Gabriel. The black silhouetted citizen gave this hand a thin white outline to keep it from vanishing as V moved it in front of this trunk and said, I'm Blanca. The orphan mimicked each citizen once, speaking the linear word they'd spoken, aping their hand gesture. Symbols had formed for all three of them, binding their icons, complete with tags and the linear words together, even though the tags and the linear words still connected to nothing else. The citizen whose icon had made them all chant Inoshiro said, So far, so good. But how does it get a name of its own? The one with its tag bound to Blanca said, Orphans name themselves. The orphan echoed, Orphans name themselves. The citizen bound to Gabriel pointed to the one bound to Inoshiro and said, V is... The citizen bound to Blanca said Inoshiro. Then the citizen bound to Inoshiro pointed back at Ver and said, V is... This time the citizen bound to Blanca replied, Blanca. The orphan joined in, pointing where the others pointed, guided by innate systems which helped make sense of the scape's geometry, and completing the pattern easily even when no one else did. Then the golden-furred citizen pointed at the orphan and said, V is... The input navigator spun the orphan's angle of view, trying to see what the citizen was pointing at. When it found nothing behind the orphan, it moved its point of view backward, closer to the golden-furred citizen, momentarily breaking step with the output navigator. Suddenly, the orphan saw the icon it was projecting itself, a crude amalgam of the three citizens' icons, all black fur and yellow metal, not just as the usual faint metal image from the cross-connected channels, but as a vivid scape object beside the other three. This was what the golden-furred citizen bound to Gabriel was pointing at. The infotrope went wild. It couldn't complete the unfinished regularity. It couldn't answer the game's question for this strange fourth citizen. But the hole in the pattern needed to be filled. The orphan watched the fourth citizen change shape and color out there in the scape, changes perfectly mirroring its own random fidgeting, sometimes mimicking one of the other three citizens, sometimes simply playing with the possibilities of Gestalt. This mesmerized the regularity detectors for a while, but it only made the infotrope more restless. The infotrope combined and recombined all the factors at hand and set a short-term goal, making the pewter-skinned Inoshiro icon change the way the fourth citizen's icon was changing. This triggered a faint anticipatory firing of the relevant symbols, a mental image of the desired event. But though the image of a wiggling, pulsating citizen icon easily won control of the Gestalt output channel, it wasn't the Inoshiro icon that changed, just the fourth citizen's icon as before. The input navigator drifted of its own accord back into the same location as the output navigator, and the fourth citizen abruptly vanished. The infotrope pushed the navigators apart again. The fourth citizen reappeared. The Inoshiro citizen said, "What's it doing?" The Blanca citizen replied, "Just watch and be patient. You might learn something." A new symbol was already forming, a representation of the strange fourth citizen, the only one whose icon seemed bound by a mutual attraction to the orphan's viewpoint in the scape, and the only one whose actions the orphan could anticipate and control with such ease. So were all four citizens the same kind of thing? Like all lions, all antelope, all circles? Or not? The connections between the symbols remained tentative. The Inoshiro citizen said, "I'm bored. Let someone else babysit it." V danced around the group, taking turns imitating the Blanca and Gabriel icons, and reverting to this original form. "What's my name? I don't know. What's my signature? I don't have one. I'm an orphan. I'm an orphan. I don't even know how I look." When the orphan perceived the Inoshiro citizen taking on the icons of the other two, it almost abandoned its whole classification scheme in confusion. The Inoshiro citizen was behaving more like the fourth citizen now, though this actions still didn't coincide with the orphan's intentions. The orphan's symbol for the fourth citizen kept track of that citizen's appearance and location in the scape, but it was also beginning to distill the essence of the orphan's own mental images and short-term goals, creating a summary of all the aspects of the orphan's state of mind which seemed to have some connection to the fourth citizen's behavior. Few symbols possessed sharply defined boundaries, though. Most were as permeable and promiscuous as plasmid-swapping bacteria. The symbol for the Inoshiro citizen copied some of the state-of-mind structures from the symbol for the fourth citizen and began trying them out for itself. At first, the ability to represent highly summarized mental images and goals was no help at all, because it was still linked to the orphan's state of mind. The Inoshiro symbol's blindly cloned machinery kept predicting that the Inoshiro citizen would behave according to the orphan's own plans, and that never happened. In the face of this repeated failure, the links soon withered, and the tiny, crude model of a mind left inside the Inoshiro symbol was set free to find the Inoshiro state of mind that best matched the citizen's actual behavior. The symbol tried out different connections, different theories, hunting for the one that made most sense, and the orphan suddenly grasped the fact that the Inoshiro citizen had been imitating the fourth citizen. The infotrope seized on this revelation and tried to make the fourth citizen mimic the Inoshiro citizen back. The fourth citizen proclaimed, I'm an orphan! I'm an orphan! I don't even know how I look." The Gabriel citizen pointed at the fourth citizen and said, "Thee is an orphan." The Inoshiro citizen agreed wearily, "Thee is an orphan, but why does thee have to be this slow?" Inspired, driven by the infantry, the orphan tried playing the "thee is" game again, this time using the response, "an orphan," for the fourth citizen. The others confirmed the choice, and soon the words were bound to the symbol for the fourth citizen. When the orphan's three friends left the scape, the fourth citizen remained. But the fourth citizen had exhausted this ability to offer interesting surprises, so after pestering some of the other citizens to no avail, the orphan returned to the library. The input navigator had learned the simplest indexing scheme used by the library, and when the infotrope hunted for ways to tie up the loose ends in the patterns half-formed in the scape, it succeeded in driving the input navigator to locations in the library which referred to the four citizens' mysterious linear words: Inoshiro, Gabriel, Blanca, and orphan. There were streams of data indexed by each of these words, though none seemed to connect to the citizens themselves. The orphan saw so many images of fleshers, often with wings, associated with the word Gabriel, that it built a whole symbol out of the regularities it found. But the new symbol barely overlapped with that of the golden-furred citizen. The orphan drifted away from its infotrope-driven search many times. Old addresses in the library etched away from its infotrope-driven search many times. Old addresses in the library, etched in memory, tugged at the input navigator. Once, viewing a scene of a grimy flesher child holding up an empty wooden bowl, the orphan grew bored and veered back toward more familiar territory. Halfway there, it came across a scene of an adult flesher crouching beside a bewildered lion cub and lifting it into this arms. A lioness lay on the ground behind them, motionless and bloody. The flesher stroked the head of the cub. Poor little Yatima. Something in the scene transfixed the orphan. It whispered to the library, "Yatima, Yatima." It had never heard the word before, but the sound of it resonated deeply. The lion cub mewed. The flesher crooned, "My poor little orphan." The orphan moved between the library and the scape with the orange sky and the flying pig fountain. Sometimes its three friends were there, or other citizens would play with it for a while. Sometimes there was only the fourth citizen. The fourth citizen rarely appeared the same from visit to visit. He tended to resemble the most striking image the orphan had seen in the library in the preceding few kilotall. But V was still easy to identify. V was the one who only became visible when the two navigators moved apart. Every time the orphan arrived in the scape, it stepped back from itself and checked out the fourth citizen. Sometimes it adjusted the icon, bringing it closer to a specific memory, or fine-tuning it according to the aesthetic preferences of the input classifying networks, biases first carved out by a few dozen trait fields, then deepened or silted up by the subsequent data stream. Sometimes the orphan mimicked the flesher it had seen picking up the lion cub, tall and slender, with deep black skin and brown eyes, dressed in a purple robe. And once, when the citizen bound to Inoshiro said with mock sorrow, "Poor little orphan, you still don't have a name," the orphan remembered the scene and responded, "Poor little Yatima." The golden-furred citizen said, "I think it does now." From then on, they all called the fourth citizen Yatima. They said it so many times, making such a fuss about it, that the orphan soon bound it to the symbol as strongly as orphan. The orphan watched the citizen bound to Inoshiro, chanting triumphantly at the fourth citizen, "Yatima, Yatima, ha ha ha, I've got 5 parents and 5 part siblings, and I'll always be older than you." The orphan made the fourth citizen respond, "Inoshiro, Inoshiro, ha ha ha." But it couldn't think what to say next. Blanca said, "The Gleisners are trimming an asteroid right now in real time. Do you want to come see? Inoshiro's there, Gabriel's there. Just follow me." Blanca's icon put out a strange new tag, and then abruptly vanished. The forum was almost empty. There were a few regulars near the fountain, who the orphan knew would be unresponsive, and there was the fourth citizen, as always. Blanca reappeared. "What is it? You don't know how to follow me, or you don't want to come?" The orphan's language analysis networks had begun fine-tuning the universal grammar they encoded, rapidly homing in on the conventions of linear. Words were becoming more than isolated triggers for symbols, each with a single fixed meaning. The subtleties of order, context, and inflection were beginning to modulate the symbol's cascades of interpretation. This was a request to know what the fourth citizen wanted. "Play with me." The orphan had learned to call the fourth citizen I or me, rather than Yatima. But that was just grammar, not self-awareness. "I want to watch the trimming, Yatima." "No, play with me." The orphan weaved around Burr excitedly, projecting fragments of recent memories. Blanca creating shared scape objects, spinning numbered blocks and brightly colored bouncing balls, and teaching the orphan how to interact with them. Okay. Here's a new game. I just hope you're a fast learner." Blanca emitted another extra tag, the same general flavor as before, though not identical, then vanished again, only to reappear immediately a few hundred delta away across the scape. The orphan spotted Ver easily, and followed at once. Blanca jumped again, and again. Each time, V sent out the new flavor of tag with a slight variation before vanishing. Just as the orphan was starting to find the game dull, Blanca began to stay out of the scape for a fraction of a taw before reappearing, and the orphan spent the time trying to guess where V'd materialized next, hoping to get to the chosen spot first. There seemed to be no pattern to it, though. Blanca's solid shadow jumped around the forum at random, anywhere from the cloisters to the fountain, and the orphan's guesses all failed. It was frustrating. But Blanca's games had usually turned out to possess some kind of subtle order in the past, so the infotrope persisted, combining and recombining existing pattern detectors into new coalitions, hunting for a way to make sense of the problem. The tags. When the infotrope compared the memory of the raw Gestalt data for the tags Blanca was sending with the address the innate geometry networks computed when the orphan caught sight of Ver a moment later, parts of the two sequences matched up, almost precisely. Again and again. The infotrope bound the two sources of information together, recognizing them as two means of learning the same thing, and the orphan began jumping across the scape without waiting to see where Blanca reappeared. The first time, their icons overlapped, and the orphan had to back away before it saw that Blanca really was there, confirming the success the infotrope had already brashly claimed. The second time, the orphan instinctively compensated, varying the tag address slightly to keep from colliding, as it had learned to do when pursuing Blanca by sight. The third time, the orphan beat Ver to the destination. "I win!" "Well done, Yatima. You followed me." "I followed you." "Shall we go and see the trimming now?" with Inoshiro and Gabriel? Gabriel. I'll take that as a yes. Blanca jumped, the orphan followed, and the cloistered square dissolved into a billion stars. The orphan examined the strange new scape. Between them, the stars shone in almost every frequency from kilometer-long radio waves to high-energy gamma rays. The color space of Gestalt could be extended indefinitely, and the orphan had chanced on a few astronomical images in the library which employed a similar palette. But most terrestrial scenes and most scapes never went beyond infrared and ultraviolet. Even the satellite views of planetary surfaces seemed drab and muted in comparison. The planets were too cold to blaze across the spectrum like this. There were hints of subtle order in the riot of color, series of emission and absorption lines, smooth contours of thermal radiation. But the infotrope, dazzled, gave in to the overload and simply let the data flow through it. Analysis would have to wait for 1,000 more clues. The stars were geometrically featureless, point-like, distant, their scape addresses impossible to compute. But the orphan had a fleeting mental image of the act of moving toward them and imagined for an instant the possibility of seeing them up close. The orphan spotted a cluster of citizens nearby, and once it shifted its attention from the backdrop of stars, it began to notice dozens of small groups scattered around the scape. Some of their icons reflected the ambient radiation, but most were simply visible by decree, making no pretense of interacting with the starlight. Inoshiro said, "Why did you have to bring that along?" As the orphan turned toward Ver, it caught sight of a star far brighter than all the rest, much smaller than the familiar sight in the Earth's sky, but unfiltered by the usual blanket of gases and dust. "The sun?" Gabriel said, "Yes, that's the sun." The golden-furred citizen floated beside Blanca, who was visible as sharply as ever, darker even than the cool, thin background radiation between the stars. Inoshiro whined, "Why did you bring Yatima? It's too young. It won't understand anything." Blanca said, "Just ignore Ver Yatima." Yatima. The orphan knew exactly where Yatima was and what V looked like without any need to part the navigators and check. The fourth citizen's icon had stabilized as the tall flesher in the purple robe who'd adopted the lion cub in the library. Inoshiro addressed the orphan. "Don't worry, Yatima. I'll try to explain it to you. If the Gleisners didn't trim this asteroid, then in 300,000 years, 10,000 teratau, there'd be a chance it might hit the Earth. And the sooner they trim it, the less energy it takes. But they couldn't do it before, because the equations are chaotic. So they couldn't model the approach well enough until now." The orphan understood none of this. "Blanca wanted me to see the trimming, but I wanted to play a new game." Inoshiro laughed. "So what did V do? Kidnap you?" "I followed Ver, and V jumped and jumped, and I followed Ver." The orphan made a few short jumps around the three of them, trying to illustrate the point, though it didn't really convey the business of leaping right out of one scape into another. Inoshiro said, "Shh, here it comes." The orphan followed V's gaze to an irregular lump of rock in the distance, lit by the sun, one half in deep shadow, moving swiftly and steadily toward the loose assembly of citizens. The Scape software decorated the asteroid's image with Gestalt tags packed with information about its chemical composition, its mass, its spin, its orbital parameters. The orphan recognized some of these flavors from the library, but it had no real grasp yet of what they meant. "One slip of the laser and the fleshers die in pain. Inoshiro's pewter eyes gleamed. Blanca said dryly, "And just 300 millennia to try again." Inoshiro turned to the orphan and added reassuringly, "But we'd be all right. Even if it wiped out Konishi on Earth, we're backed up all over the solar system." The asteroid was close enough now for the orphan to compute its scape address and its size. It was still some 100 times more distant than the farthest citizen, but it was approaching rapidly.